An elderly parishioner called Margaret Graham from the parish of Christ Church, Thornton Clevelys, that's near Blackpool. She said to me one day, she says, "Lawrie, did you know that God's last gift is remembrance? And he gave us memories so we could have roses in our December." You've just witnessed a magic trick. The definition of magic is a happening for which there is no logical explanation. That the definition of a miracle is the same thing, a happening for which you can find no logical explanation. Today, I'm going to talk about conversion, true stories of happenings for which most folk can find no logical explanation, under the banner of conversion. Somebody might be saying, what does he mean by conversion? Well, the word conversion means turning towards. Now, your baptism, you're probably too small to remember this, so somebody would say it on your behalf. But the question would be asked, do you turn to Christ? And the answer would be, we turn to Christ. Conversion is necessary for every Christian. Everybody needs to be converted, and it's important that it's not just a one-off act, but a daily conversion. And it's interesting, I think it's interesting to note that the act of conversion normally happens by ending in worship. Now, true conversion is to be saved from sin, from selfishness, from greed, from lust, from jealousy. But, you know, the list is endless. It's interesting to note that the act of conversion always ends up, though, as I said, in worship. Now, we've all had at one time or other somebody saying, listen, you don't have to go to church, you know, to be a Christian. Well, I'm afraid there's no such thing as a Christian without the church. And I don't mean the building, I mean the body of believers. Now, let me put it this way. Imagine for a moment, you're not huddled around your radiator, but you're sitting in front of a big, lovely coal fire and your favourite armchair. And you're gazing into these lovely, warm, flickering flames. And all of a sudden, a piece of coal falls from the main body of the fire and ends up on the hearth. Well, yeah, it will glow for a little while, but eventually it will go a grey colour and turn cold. So it is if someone falls away from the main body of believers. Most of us who make up the church, the body of believers, are what are called once born Christians or cradle Christians. And you are the lucky ones because you've always known the presence of God in your lives. You've always been aware of him. So I'm going to explore with you today those whose experience of Christ coming into their lives is, well, different. In many cases, absolutely shattering and life-changing. Let's start with this chap called Saul of Tarsus. Now, his experience on the Damascus Road, when he was suddenly hit by a blinding light, which did actually blind him, when he was on his way to persecute Christians, it shook him to his innermost being. It really did. Now, the moment the whole direction of that light, the whole direction of his life, it changed. Now, Paul was no hysterical weakling. If ever a man had a sane and healthy mind, Paul had. If ever a man felt sure of anything all his life, Paul felt sure. And if ever a man lived out his life completely to his faith, that would be Paul. He sacrificed his whole life. Now let's move forward a bit to AD, I think it's 354. Yeah. You meet a man there called St. Augustine of Hippo. Do you know, if the tabloid newspapers had been around in his day, they would have had a field day with him, because seemingly there was no sin in which he had not participated. Oh, think of that. One day, whilst in great despair, and weeping bitterly, and here I quote, "How long should I go on saying, tomorrow, tomorrow? Why not now? Why not make an amend of my ugly sins at this moment?" Suddenly he had the voice of children playing outside. They were playing a game similar, as opposed to our Ring a Ring of Roses. Only in this case it was tell a leggy, tell a leggy. And tell a leggy meant take up and read. Now, I had been reading the New Testament some time before, and the book still lay open on his missal stand. And he started to read the passage from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 13, verse 13. No orgies or drunkenness, no immorality or indecency, no fighting or jealousy. Take up the weapons of the Lord Jesus Christ and stop giving attention to your sinful nature to satisfy its desires. As he reached the end of the sentence, he said that a light of faith flooded into his heart, and all darkness of doubt was dispelled. He turned to Christ. He was converted then. Baptized, became a priest and a bishop and a tower of strength to the church, and also one of the greatest theologians in Christendom. Another example, a man called John Wesley. You've heard of him. He was a 16th century Anglican priest who had a vital Christian experience, and he's very precise about it, on the 24th of May 1738. After hearing a passage being read at a meeting taking place in Aldersgate Street, London, the direction of John Wesley's life changed. From that day onwards, ask any Methodist, they'll tell you. A final example is a man in our times, a man from Blackpool, who in July kissed his pretty wife goodbye, got on a plane and headed towards the Isle of Man. He was to appear at the Villa Marina. Excuse me. At the Villa Marina with Sir Ken Dodd. He wasn't a sir then, of course. He was just a famous comedian. A lovely man. Now, after the show, this man, well, first of all, let me just tell you, after they had rehearsals and what they call a banco, he had to look for some digs. Opposite the Villa Marina is a road, well, it was there, I suppose, full of B&Bs and hotels and everything, and right along the front as well. Douglas Allen. He looked at all the windows and they all had full, no vacancies. And he came to one, and it had vacancies. So he walked in there, rang the doorbell, and as the man came to the door, he walked in, but something disturbed him. He'd just seen a plaque on the wall and it said, Christian Hotel. Now he admitted he was no Christian. I suppose he was what you call an agnostic. Prove it to me and I'll believe. The man had only one room left, so he took it. It was Glasgow holiday fortnight after all. Now, after he did the show and returned back to his digs, he realised when he got into bed that he had nothing to read. Now, he couldn't fall asleep when he was away from his own home, he said, because he was just one of these funny people. You maybe are the same. Pillows are too soft, too high, too low. So he thought, I'll have something to read before I sleep. And he'd left all his newspapers and his magazines in a friend's car who gave him a lift. He was panic-stricken. He said he looked around the room and he saw there on his bedside cabinet a book. He picked it up. It was Gideon's Bible. He flicked through it and he thought, oh no. It was the King James Version, I think. He put it back down and he said, I can't be bothered with that. He had the ladies coming out of the pubs and discos because it was a hot, sticky night in July, and his window, he said, was half up to get some air going, so he couldn't ignore their voices. Hey, Jimmy, that was a rare night we had tonight, eh? And that pub, eh? He says, I'll never get to sleep with this din. The stiletto heels clicking on the pavements. He said he looked at the bedside cabinet and a little shelf, and he looked right at the back and he spotted a book. He said, ah. So he pulled his book out and he pumped up his good pillows and he started to read it. He looked at the title. He says, what's this? It looked a bit boring, actually. He said, good news for the modern man. Meant nothing to him at all. So he started to read it. But it was written in today's English, not King James English. And so he settled down to read it, and he read that book right into the night. He read right until the end of Acts. That's a fair old chunk, believe me. He was at Matthew's Gospel, chapter 7, verse 7, and suddenly funny things began to happen to him. He had experiences which he'd never had before. He read, knock and the door will be open to you. Seek and you will find. And he says the words seemed to leap out of the page at him, as if he was being spoken to. And he suddenly felt waves of joy sweeping through him. It moved him to tears. And then he realized he'd got life all wrong. And he was a changed person, but he didn't really realize it at that moment. He said he slept like a baby. Never had such a deep sleep in his whole life. Now, he hadn't realized, but he'd been converted. He even started going to the church across the road where he lived. I think it was called St. Stephen's on the Cliffs, Blackpool. He used to complain about those bells waking him up every Sunday morning. Why do they ring these bells all day? Or he'd go outside and have a go at these, what he called Holy Joes, parking their cars in front of his drive and up and down the street. So here he was, like a magnet pulling him into this church. He'd been converted, all right. His whole direction of his life changed. He took an O-level to answer some of his burning questions about Christianity. He ended up offering himself for ordination. And he said a great weight was lifted from him. And there was a feeling of deep peace that descended. He was ordained, became a clergyman, became a vicar. I know now he's a much happier man than he was. Gone now is that big Mercedes Benz he used to drive. That was replaced by a Honda 50 moped. But he's a much happier man. How do I know all this? Well, I am that man. And this is the very book. Good news for the modern man. These are all true miracles I've told you, real happenings. And I'm just one of the many living proofs that Jesus is still around. And he's still performing his miracles, still reaching down, and he's still touching lives. To this very day. Just ask him to come into yours. Magic will be performed. I'm going to say a little prayer with you now. Close your eyes and join me. We'll be in the presence of Jesus. O Saviour of the world, lifted up on the cross to draw people of all races and all nations to yourself. Bless the witness of your church in this and in every place, and help us to finish the work you have given us to do in the world for which you died. And we ask this in your name, our living and victorious Lord. Amen. Thank you for joining me today. May you have a really deep, peaceful day today. And may the Lord hold you in the hollow of his hand.